Joining us now from the Trump 2020 campaign, Marc. Hey, Marc, great to have you with us.
Oh, it's good to be with you, John.
So, Marc, the president yesterday going to El Paso and Dayton met with some protesters, but the president trying to be the healer in chief, if you will. Now, he's also, we've had a raging debate here. I'm in favor of the president's two gun legislative suggestions to tighten the loopholes on background checks. And also he's gone to Mitch McConnell, and he's gone to, who then went subsequently to Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Lindsey Graham, the president asking for common sense legislation on extending the red flag law, so that a whack job like that nutbag in Dayton can't buy a high-powered rifle with a 100 mag drum clip and shoot 9 people in 60 seconds. Had that law been enacted or some facsimile of it, that kid would not have been able to buy that type of a gun. What say you?
I agree. Especially on the red flag laws. We need to remember what we've already used in our past in other situations that has worked. I go back to see something, say something, post 9/11, and even I'll draw the comparison to friends don't let friends drive drunk. When we trust the American people to be on alert and to take notice of loved ones, friends, acquaintances who might be about to make a bad decision, which could cost their own lives or risk the lives of others, the American people have shown that they have the capacity to step forward. So allowing law enforcement and getting a judicial process into place where if you do see that red flag, and there was a study by the Secret Service that showed that over 90% of school shooters have given red flag warnings in the past. Over 80% have said something about their plans to somebody. If we have that mechanism in place where we can protect not only from someone who might be a threat to themselves, but a threat to others, then that is a great way for the American people to take ownership in helping to identify people who might be having that mental problem and could be going down that dark path, but also saving the lives of our fellow citizens.
You're so right, and those are two great examples that I haven't really thought of. The see something, say something. Remember, that was all over the airports. It was on Amtrak. It was everywhere, and I think it did raise awareness that if you saw something, you would simply mention it to the nearest officer or to some law enforcement, and there was no downside. If everything was fine, you might get checked, but it's fine. So that's why I don't see what the downside is to this, and I think the president's instincts on this, Marc, are really solid. Now, let's get to the president's visit to these two cities yesterday, met with protests. What about some of the Democratic left-wing vitriol blaming the president for these deaths in El Paso, but, of course, not saying anything about the shooter in Dayton who was a Elizabeth Warren backer? What did you make of that, Marc?
It's absolutely despicable the way the Democrats and many of their, if not all of their presidential candidates have acted in these days following these national tragedies. The Democrat National Committee was fundraising on it, and so have many of their top, some of their Democrat candidates. Obviously, the ones that are, have no shot at the nomination are flooding onto the liberal media airwaves trying to save and kickstart their failing campaigns. But then you even have, Biden out there giving an angry speech attacking the president on a day of national healing. Well, the president is there visiting with the victims of these shootings, praising the first responders who charged into danger to confront these crazed people with weapons, and they're out there trying to score cheap political points. It is just so disrespectful, and I think that as many Americans are seeing this, and they're seeing the blatant, you've got MSNBC out there floating conspiracy theories about, when the flags are going up and all those kinds of things. I think they just ignore it, and they realize how far gone the mainstream media is, how far to the left that the Democrats have become. Because I'll tell you, I don't blame Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren for the attack in Dayton. I don't blame Bernie Sanders for the congressional shooting, baseball shooting that almost killed Steve Scalise. And we've just got to stop it. The only people who are responsible for these attacks are the deranged people who pulled the trigger.
This conspiracy theory is being spun on MSNBC now. We talked about a little bit about that earlier. How do you even take this network seriously? What were they spinning yesterday? Something about the president lowering the flags to half staff, to halfway down. And what was that? What were they saying that was an interpretation of?
Yeah, it was some numerologist, apparently, who used to work for the FBI, at some point. You have to question that decision. But who spun this tale about because the flags are coming up today at sundown, and then because that is August 8th, 8/8, that means something to some white supremacist groups or some neo-Nazi groups, and so it was a secret a symbol or a signal toward white supremacists. I mean, you've got to be freaking kidding me. You can't make this stuff up. And then you've got Joe Scarborough out there talking about anybody who contributes to Donald Trump is contributing to white supremacy. You've got Nicole Wallace out there, actually lying and having to walk back things about the president wanting to exterminate Latinos. I mean, they have gone so far, just so far off the reservation, so far over the cliff that it's laughable. There's no credibility left, and yet the they're just feeding right into this. They're lining up all of their candidates to go say these crazy things on these networks. And I give the president a lot of credit. When he was on the ground there in those two communities, he was focused on the victims. He was focused on the medical staff that fought to save as many people as they could, and the first responders. And to see this action by the president to be twisted in the minds of these radicals and their media allies, it's so disheartening. And I just have to hope that the American people see through it.
Well, look, I think they are, and these people on MSNBC have gone off the nutbag rail. I mean, they spent 3 years basically trying to tell us that the president was a Russian asset. That blew up in their face, and now they're going to this. I got a text here from Caleb in Virginia Beach, who says former assistant director of the FBI said that the date and the time of the flags will be lowered to half-mast on 8/8, and since age in the alphabet is the eighth number, that HH stands for Heil Hitler. I mean, you've got to be kidding me, right?
You can't make it up.
Like the president is controlling the dates on a calendar. I mean, you have got to. These people are certifiably insane. This is why the president's going to win again, Mark, only bigger. Let's talk about some key states. I'm going to New Hampshire next week. I'm going to be around the state. I'll be in Salem. I'll be in Windham. I'll be in Manchester for the rally on Thursday. So we're going to be traveling around the state talking to voters live on our show, which I often do. You guys are targeting New Hampshire. Only lost it by 2,700 votes. Plus, you got a Senate race coming up in there. Jane Shaheen only won her race 6 years ago by a small margin. How do we win New Hampshire?
Well, I think first off, we have to just show them the results. I mean, one of the biggest differences between an initial election campaign and a re-election campaign is you're not asking people to make a leap of faith. And putting their faith in you that you will do something, you now have the record to run on. So
right.
New Hampshire, of all places, knows the benefit of the strong economy that has been created by the president. The fact that
right.
he's delivered on these conservative principles, whether it's judges, whether it's rolling back regulations, and all the things that have led to the strong economy and so many other things. So the president's got a very strong record to run on. They've got a great
right.
governor up there who's working to help elect this president in 2020, and we're confident that with getting him up there, with getting that word out, that New Hampshire will show that they definitely want to keep the success of this country going right now the way it is with President Trump.
What about Virginia? Can we win Virginia?
It's going to be difficult. I'm not going to lie. It's not something we're definitely focused on. But I mean, Virginia, especially here in the DC suburbs, is very much a bastion of liberal, radical Democrat votes. But there are so many people across the state of Virginia that can see the benefits. Whether it is obviously the growing economy, whether it is the fact that the president lived up to his commitment and made the largest increase in spending in our military in history, and that means good things, not only for all of the military installations, obviously, that dot the shoreline along Virginia's coast, but also the people who are investing in the new ships and building them and all of those things. You can go up and down the line. There are so many reasons why Virginia should be going back to voting for President Trump. We're definitely going to work on it. We're definitely going to put some resources in the state, but it's going to take word of mouth from people because they're not going to get the narrative. They're not going to get the truth when they're watching the D.C. media or any of the national media. It's going to rely on people talking to their friends, their neighbors, their people at church, the people at work, and saying, you can keep this going, or you can go completely to the other end of the spectrum and have your private health insurance taken away from you by big government socialism and free health care for illegal immigrants and free college for everyone and with no way to pay for it and all those things that just don't add up to what the American people have said they want.
Mark, let me ask you something. For those that are now getting involved in volunteering for the Trump campaign in 2020, we had our national training week where we trained across the country the Trump campaign, thousands and thousands of people. How did that go? Just give our listening audience who didn't get a chance to attend one of those trainings, how did that go, and what was your general impression of it, Marc Lotter?
I mean, there is such a groundswell of support for this president, and we see it everywhere, including in Virginia and in blue states, purple states. And when you can get thousands of people there, and they're now being armed with the information and the technology to come to be able to go to talk to those neighbors, talk to their friends, to people, that should be coming out and supporting the president. It's going to help arm them. They understand that they're the key to this. This election is not going to be won on MSNBC, CNN. It's not going to be won by any single television ad that we can produce. The best case we have, the best resource we have, is those thousands of people being able to go out and talk to their friends, knowing the facts, and knowing who they should talk to, and making sure that they get out to the polls. And that's where you see such strong support from the president. We're going to have so many more volunteers than we had in 2016. This is going to be a very technologically advanced but also massive operation on the ground to make sure we get everyone out to the polls and everyone that they know who want to come out to the polls and support this president.
That's the way we're going to win, and you're right. It's not going to be with television ads or some of the traditional thing. It's going to be feet on the street and the number of Trump supporters, and we have to get them out. And that's why, Mark, in my opinion, the Castro brothers put that tweet out, and why there's so many people trying to intimidate Trump voters, because they don't want them to show their preference for the president. They don't want them knocking on doors. They don't want them making phone calls. They want to embarrass or shame them out or intimidate them out that they might be accosted or something else. That was part of the reason that he put that tweet out. We're with Marc Lotter. He's the Director of Strategic Communications for the Trump-Pence 2020 campaign. And when you look at the level of doxing that went on, I mean, for the Castros to put that out, that they were publishing names and addresses of their own constituents. Some of those people had already donated to Castro. But why did they do it? They did it for one reason, and that was to intimidate people from being involved, getting involved with the Trump campaign. And even though you can get that stuff online, it's publicly available, it's another thing to format it, put their address there, put it online, tweet it out. I mean, what was the purpose of that? It was to discourage people from getting involved, at best, at worst, to encourage that they be harassed or something to that nature, Mark. I mean, could you imagine, Marc Lotter, if a Republican did that? Could you imagine if somebody put out the biggest donors of AOC or something and a Republican did that? Could you imagine the backlash they would have had?
No, and we would never do something like that. This is nothing short of a target list of retirees and local business leaders in that community. that support this president, in many cases supported, as you said, Castro and others, and to shame them. And we see it, whether it is people who are harassed for wearing a Make America Great Again hat or showing their support for this president. They are trying to make it where you cannot show your support for this president, and it's going to backfire on them, because that's not how we conduct our democracy. And speaking in Virginia, the birthplace of our democracy, that's not how we do things. We have to recognize that even though we might have political differences with people who are our family, who are our friends, or who are our acquaintances, we are still family, friends, acquaintances, Americans, and neighbors together. We can have our disputes and we solve them at the ballot box, but when you call on the public humiliation, the shaming, or outright protesting outside their house, calling for violence, it's not acceptable. And I think the American people need to step up and admit and say that. And what's even more disturbing is that not a single 2020 candidate has condemned it. Nancy Pelosi hasn't condemned it. And not surprisingly, the national media has given it scant coverage, but they haven't run around and chased around all these Democrats and asked them their thoughts on it. Put them on the record, because I know everybody with an R next to their name gets harassed by reporters every day saying, "What's your reaction to the president's latest tweet?" Well, look what the Democrats did, and they're not running around chasing Democrats asking them to condemn it. And
Well, Marc,
unless they do that, I think they are complicit in it.
Well, that's the hypocrisy that goes on in the fake news and with everything that we deal with now every day with Trump. And I was telling this story earlier on the air. My son plays high school baseball. He's on a travel team this summer. So we spent 6 weeks traveling around the Southeast mainly, Alabama, Florida twice, and where else were we? Georgia, Atlanta, Charleston, things like that. So I was with him for 6 weeks. So you'd go to a baseball game, and I would have on my Trump hat. I have a white one, a red one. Sometimes I would wear my Trump shirt. In the 6-week period, Marc, I must have had 100 people. And I don't mean, sometimes you say 100, yeah, it's like 10. No, I must have had over 100 people come up to me. I didn't know them, strangers, and whisper, "Hey, I'm with your guy too," or "Hey, I support the president too," or tap me on the shoulder and give me a thumbs up privately while nobody was watching. I mean, these were public high school baseball games, right? People afraid to say publicly, "Hey, I'm with Trump." So they have to say it privately. That is part of the intimidation that has gone on, that people are afraid to publicly express their support of the president.
You're absolutely right. I get the same thing, John, when I was in Detroit last week where the Democrat debates were being held. And I had Uber drivers, I had people of all walks of life from all backgrounds coming up to me when they obviously saw whether it was my lapel pin or recognized for what I do, with the campaign, to tap me on the shoulder and say, they like what's going on in Michigan and they support the president. And it's fine. I get it. If you want to wear it and wear it proudly, do so. If you want to be a Trump supporter and whisper your support to us or to others, that's great as well. The key is you're out there. Don't buy into the narrative from the mainstream media that it's some sort of small group of people who support this president. It's an actual movement. And I've been told, not only in Michigan and other places where I have traveled, from so many people who used to be, and still are, middle of the road. Some of them would say, I used to be a moderate Democrat, always voted Democrat, have come up to me and said, I don't even recognize the Democrat Party anymore. Mm-hmm. And when given the choice between what the president has delivered versus the socialist plans and big government takeover plans that is being offered by the leading Democrats, they're like, this is an easy choice for me. We're going to choose to keep going the way we are with the president.
It's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out, but I'm with you on this, Marc. I think that there are so many supporters of President Trump right now that they're not showing up in the polls. They're not public, but I think we're going to continue to see more and more people get involved with this re-election campaign. Marc Lotter, I'm out of time. Thanks for being with us. Marc Lotter, Strategic Communications Director, Trump 2020.